The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Big Ben Haslar presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Haslar. Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we're hearing the case of the people versus the bride. I don't know. I was going for like a Frankenstein voice. Didn't really come off.
It didn't.
I think you mean Frankenstein's monster, Your Honor.
I don't know about this one. The names are kind of all over the place. But today we're hearing the case of the people versus the bride, a 1985 fantasy romance about Dr. Frankenstein creating and training the perfect woman while his original monster explores the world. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we're here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in the courtroom, films are considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, you are representing the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Some would say The Bride of Frankenstein from 1935 is not only the best Universal monster movie, but the best Frankenstein movie. Heck, some say it's the best movie. I would not say those things, but some people do say that, possibly some people in this courtroom. So any remake or reimagination of it would have high expectations and face a lot of scrutiny. We often grapple with how much we need to consider originals in this courtroom. As you recall, in my successful prosecution in the case of The People versus an American Werewolf in Paris, I am comfortable judging a movie.
Bragging about it now, sir.
Actually, I mentioned a couple cases in this one that are fun. So I am comfortable judging a movie that makes allusions to wildly more successful and popular movies standing on their own. But in this case, we can't really fully ignore it because we're trying to tackle one of the all-time greats, which itself is pulling from a bedrock piece of literature. So we do have our work cut out for us. So while we need to look at this in the continuum of Frankenstein lore, we can still say, however, there is plenty of wrong in a vacuum. We are treated to a bifurcated story worthy of a Bravo miniseries in its melodrama. And given the acting, you forget that these are supposed to be reanimated corpses, not just corpses. So to paraphrase The Good Doctor, she's guilty! Guilty!
That's a good Frankenstein.
Thank you.
Fine. No more Frankenstein. You're cut off. Mr. Ian Potter, you are representing the defense. Please present your opening statement.
Your Honor. Pronounced with a U in honor because, well, someone has to maintain standards.
How dare you!
My esteemed colleague for the prosecution, gentle folk of the jury, that bailiff man who I assume is meant to be Scottish. I am a stranger in your land,
Scottish-American.
and thus not entirely familiar with your benighted, corrupted colonial system of jurisprudence. I have, however, seen many episodes of Petrocelli, all of Better Call Saul, most of my cousin Vinny, and I've followed the recent court case with the fat orange man who kept nodding off and breaking wind, so I feel I have some sense of your alternative legal system. Now, before I'm pilloried, do you have pillories? Before I'm pilloried, or transatlantic equivalent, for arguing a case which is not, in fact, my own, may I first stress the case I propose to put today was this. The 1985 Sting and Jennifer Beals film The Bride is actually pretty good, and not, in fact, unmitigated dreck like everyone else seems to think. And I think there are several misconceptions about the movie which colour audience expectations. Number
I
one.
swear to God, if there's a U in that color.
Oh, no.
There were U's all over that colour, sir.
Order in the court, Mr. Schlender. You will not object during the opening statement.
I'm so sorry.
Misconception number one. It is a horror picture with all the U's and is to be judged in those terms. No. In the UK, it is a 15 certificate. In the US, it was classified as a PG-13. Now, for context, at the time in the UK, a 15 was automatically given to anything even briefly displaying a Chinese martial arts weapon, thus eviscerating the Ninja Turtles in Britain more effectively than Shredder could ever have dreamt of. In those days, a glimpse of nunchuck was enough to make the censors upchuck. Now, heaven knows. Anyway, you get more horrific content in the small children's fantasy franchise Star Wars. It is not, by any modern conception, a horror movie. Misconception number 2. It is a remake of The Bride of Frankenstein. It most evidently is not. Its opening is inspired by the end of The Bride of Frankenstein. But thenceforward, yea, thenceforward, I quote, it is clearly intended to be seen as a continuation of that story within the limitations of being a Columbia film that can't use any of the names Universal came up with. As I'm sure this fine, upstanding, and charismatic jury is aware, Columbia's only previous foray into the Frankenstein mythos was as distributor of Hammer's Revenge of Frankenstein, one film before Hammer teamed up with Universal and Frankenstein's creature Mysterious has got a flat-top head again. Number 3 in my misconceptions list, it is a film about the bride, and we should expect her as the title character to be the movie's central figure. My friends, I have recently seen films entitled The Maltese Falcon and The 39 Steps, and in neither case did these titular figures turn out to be the protagonists, being instead items sought for or fought over, and there may be a similarity here. So, with these caveats acknowledged, as they would be by any fair-minded viewer, I feel there remains a strong case for stating this movie is actually pretty good. Now, okay, we have to acknowledge the big cold absence at the core of the film. Obviously, they're very pretty and facing the challenge of playing an inhuman character who's essentially an enigma onto whose blankness we're expected to project emotion, motivation, and perhaps personal growth. Yet, despite those limitations, Sting does his best. Now, surprisingly, Sting was not cast for the reasons you'd expect. The usual route for casting a Sting is a desire to have a striking featured British rock god in your movie with commanding stage presence and dramatic flair, but then finding your budget is unable to stretch to a David Bowie. It's a tale as old as time and goes some way to explaining what Mick Jagger was doing in Free Jack, the film that answers the question, what would a brilliant, thoughtful Robert Sheckley science fiction satire look like if you made it super dumb? But I digress. And sometimes, mid-digression, I actually... The other day, I was digressing, and anyway, I digress again. Sting had worked with the director Frank Rodden before, taking a small role in the film Quadrophenia before his band The Police was particularly well known, and he was originally down to play the Carrie Elwes part in The Bride. But over time, his increasingly successful pop career raised his profile, propelling him into larger movie roles that were perhaps not his forte. He's fine as Martin Peters in Brimstone and Treacle, because Martin is literally the devil posing as an ordinary man, and that means there's a certain disconnect is baked into the performance. He's great in David Lynch's Dune, or June, as any sane person would pronounce it, because he has cheekbones you can light beautifully, and the entire cinema audience has recently taken magic mushrooms. He may well be magnificent in the TV movie Artemis 81, but it's hard to tell because the whole thing is a ridiculous, impenetrable mess, which I heartily recommend. But here in The Bride, Sting's stillness as a performer undeniably weakens the film. I'm coming out with that up front. Now, sometimes stillness is great on camera. Greta Garbo's sustained close-up at the end of Queen Christina, in which we're invited to project her character's heartbreaking determination to disguise it onto an impassive mask. 10 out of 10, no notes. The effect may even be heightened by Garbo's star persona and the suspicion that she herself carries a similar tragic weight. Sting's star persona has different baggage to Garbo's. His stillness here invites the audience to say, that's Sting the pop star. He doesn't know what he's doing, does he? He can't even act. But to me, I would say this is a film, as my right honourable colleague has stated, a film of two halves, a bifurcated narrative. And I would say the heart and the soul of this film is carried in the narrative by its real hero, David Rappaport, as the dwarf. Mm-hmm. And I think that's more than enough opening statement for for one.
That's a couple of opening statements at least.
That you would come out swinging heavy early. Mr. Schlender, do you want to reserve yourself to the pillory now, or would you like to present some exhibits? Or
No, but
have the one pillory.
all right, in the tradition of American compromise, Ian, if you stop using yous, I'll wear the puffy wig. All right. So, Your Honor, for my first exhibit, actually, I want to touch on it's actually great because Ian brought up a lot of the points that I'm going to be addressing.
In order to prove that you're a wrong-headed booby with no idea about a great film if you see one.
Order in my court. Order in my court. I'm the only one allowed to say in this court.
I mean, he must have listened to some of these old episodes. So anyway, so I would like to thank the court for assigning me this case because it was a great excuse to rewatch The Bride of Frankenstein, which does more in an hour 15 than The Bride does in nearly 2. Now, I know Ian had mentioned that viewing this as a remake of The Bride would not be correct. However, we can't ignore that the director Frank Rodman does talk about this being a feminist reinterpretation of The Bride of Frankenstein in his rather anemic, but at least it's there, audio commentary. And as we pointed out, and as many loyal fans would remember all the way back in episode 2, The People versus Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan.
Remember that long?
I know. And that was back when I was still doing character bits, and Maynard actually read the disclaimer at the beginning of the episode. It was pointed out by the witness that The Bride of Frankenstein was an analogous misnomer due to the bride arriving only at the end of the feature. Wanting to one-up this, director Frank Rodman decided to introduce the bride in the first scene and then spend the rest of the feature ignoring her. And that is interesting when the stated goal, as I said, was to put a feminist spin on The Bride of Frankenstein. And this is not something that is uncommon. That is to say, to explore popular, though undeveloped, culturally resonant characters. We saw a couple years before this movie came out in the novel The Mist of Avalon, which did something similar with Arthurian legend. I've mentioned John Updike's Gertrude and Claudius before. And heck, we even saw it very contemporary with the new Furiosa movie. So for Rodman to go in this direction, it's not particularly revolutionary, but to go in that direction and not commit to it or land with any particularly resounding feminist message that only The Bride of Frankenstein could deliver is what makes this movie bad. It was a failure of intentionality, and as you listen to, again, his rather anemic, but at least it's their commentary track on the Blu-ray, this is just sad for poor Mr. Rodman, and I think he knew it.
Mr. Potter, is there a feminist message here? Does it land?
The feminist message is perhaps more complicated. Rodham projects that, and I think there's an element of in there, but we need to look beyond the director. We need to look at Lloyd Fonvielle, who was the writer of the piece, who his own blog, which survived sadly, he died, what we might say, of a broken heart several years ago. He had heart failure, and had no Frankenstein to aid him in that. He was obsessed from his childhood by Universal Films and famous monsters of Filmland. In fact, he and a friend, Paul Zahl, who I think is now a prominent Christian pastor, made Super 8 films based on these. And in fact, in the opening scene, not Dr. Pretorius and not injured. Injured is the wrong word. I don't want to say disfigured because it's unfair. Timothy Spall playing the henchman. They're named Paulus and Zalus in tribute to this friend. But the thing that Lloyd Fonvielle writes in his blog is about the kind of electric charge that seeing, quite literally, that Elsa Lanchester gave him watching it as a small boy. And I think we have to say, from his own writing, it appears to be part of his emotional and sexual awakening. So although there are feminist tropes there, and obviously the feminist tropes go way back to Mary Shelley, who is one of the founding mothers of feminism, Lloyd Fonvielle has a bit of baggage in his history about impossibly beautiful women with something feral in them and men who aren't particularly attractive who are drawn to them. I've just mentioned...
about Sting again?
I would mention his 1985 film, Cherry 2000, about a man's desire to replace his perfect female android lover, and he ends up falling in love with Melanie Griffiths along the way. TV movie Gotham from 1998, Tommy Lee Jones, all about trying to recapture the love of a ghostly wife figure. He was one of the two architects, really, of the 1999 Mummy, moving it to the kind of slightly screwball comedy basis of it. And in there, we have quite an unpleasant-looking man who's really quite obsessed about resurrecting his dead love. And it just feels like it's a trope in Fonville's work and life. By his own account, he was an awkward teen full of self-loathing who found himself driven to this unknowable, sensual, animal, magical figure, his manic dream pixie cadaver. And yeah, there is this problematic area of the feminism within The Bride, because it talks the talk, but there remains the problem that it's all in the side of the film which is about the growing education and intellectual discussion of the bride, which is frankly the flatter side of the movie. For me, the movie's power lies in the earthier side, away from high society, with the freaks of the circus, with basically many of the players of 80s alternative comedy in Britain lurking around the edges. And it's a film of charm and life there. But yes, there is some heart missing when it comes to its feminist ideals.
On that,
I'm glad you agree with me.
I think
I will remind you you're on the defense, Mr. Potter. But we'll let Mr. Schlender present the next exhibit, perhaps about the freaks of the circus.
Well, actually, I am going to get to that, but just to kind of redirect a few things that the good Mr. Potter said here is, if we want to attribute that conflicting vision to the script that the director had, you know, it's still a failure of the director's stated vision, as said in the commentary track. So I do think if this is
anemic as it was,
built, as anemic as it was, but at least it was there. Having listened to Ryan's excellent podcast, One Track Mind, so much, I just appreciate now when we actually do get commentary tracks, because they're probably going to get rarer and rarer. My point being,
you keep calling him anemic.
Well, that was anemic, but it was there. So I do think we do have that one failure of intentionality here on the feminist message side. But yes, we can look at the other side of the coin, because Ian is right. This is, and he was right saying I was right saying this is just a very bifurcated movie. So let's take a look at what we see in, if you forgive the term of art, these Frankenstein together miniseries. So I want to be sympathetic to the Ronaldo and Victor story, as it reminds me of my times traversing the countryside with Ryan Luis Rodriguez sitting on my shoulders and negotiating my circus contracts.
I want that TV show.
So this is a movie that claims to be about a feminist view of the Bride of Frankenstein, but we spend more time on the corrupt world of late 17th century circus life and politics. This Gossamer storyline is...
Point of order.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I grant you that the novel Frankenstein is set actually in the late 18th century, written in the early 19th century. But if you look at the references to Byron, you look at the references to Keats, to Shelley's husband, his Prometheus Unbound, they're all mentioned in the text, which puts this as a film after the composing of Frankenstein as a novel. So it's then we have the discussion of The New Woman, which is very much an 1890s kind of idea, much picked over by George Bernard Shaw, who was very keen on the idea of emancipated women who would like to have sex with beardy weirdies like George Bernard Shaw.
God bless him.
Well, it's a hobby. But I would say, so crucially, and obviously the allusion to Pygmalion, there is the play that became My Fair Lady, but that's actually early 20th century. So it's certainly late 1890s. And I would say the most clear evidence of that is they buy toffee apples. For God's sake, toffee apples were clearly invented in the 19th century. And if you're coming to me to talk about this film and you don't know toffee, I'm sorry. You're arguing from a point of weakness.
Ian's absolutely right. They spend way more time on the toffee apples than they do the bride. It's just one of the other many deficiencies we see in this movie. So the problem with the Ronaldo Victor story is that it's just feel good sophistry. And we have Ronaldo saying, follow your dreams. You know, it's enough to make anyone ask, what are we doing here exactly, right? And so then when we juxtapose this to the main story, or I mean, you could pick which one's the main story. I guess it doesn't particularly matter. But we juxtapose it to the other story. The interactions between Sting and Jennifer Beals are so slipshod. You wonder if they had a script. The direction is so obvious and ever present, but not in a foreboding way. We're just constantly saying, get on with it. And just when something maybe interesting could happen, maybe a bit of development, we just cut to the other story anyway. And that goes ditto for the Victor Ronaldo story. Once we kind of get comfortable with them and settle in, it's like, okay, this is kind of like a buddy thing. Oh, wait, we're back to the bride. Okay, well, no, okay, so the bride's kind of learning how to read and ride horses. Oh, no, we're back to circus politicking. You know, so this is the cinematic equivalent of being on a roller coaster, but there's no ups or downs. We simply move our cart from one track to another for 2 hours.
I think the central weakness is that we don't have a justification for the psychic bond or the spiritual bond that occurs between Victor and Eva. Maybe that first scene just needed a lightning bolt between them, and then we never quite buy that they are creatures who are kin to each other, who might get on together. And crucially, when the two stories do interweave, Eva has no agency in the destruction of Frankenstein, and I think that is largely because the film got really quite cocked up in production. The anemic commentary doesn't go quite as far as Alexei Sayle does in his autobiography. He played the wicked circus owner. He talks about basically he was supposed to be finishing his shots in July and was still in Dordogne area of France just before Christmas. Basically the film shut down production for a while because they kept peeling off bits of I've forgotten the poor chap's name now. Victor's forehead.
Clancy Brown?
Clancy Brown. Oh, yeah, he did have an allergic reaction. He got sick. Yeah, that did happen.
And I think it was closed. I think in the commentary said they closed down for about 4 weeks, but it seems like it was more like 10 weeks. And crucially, they didn't pay the crew to retain them in the same way they did pay the actors. And it's clear to me that it becomes more perfunctory what the crew are doing late on. So we've got a really quite spectacular opening sequence that sets a lot of promises for Frankenstein's lab. And then the final battle, Eva takes no part in it. It's the most efficient way we can shove Sting off the battlements, you know. And that's, to me, is where the film falls apart, in that the pieces have not been well stitched together.
Again, you are on the defense. You are on the defense, sir.
Let him talk. I agree. That is an issue. And actually, the psychic bond thing is another thing that Rodman said in his anemic, though at least it's their commentary, that just didn't quite work. There's so many things in this movie that don't quite work. The inability to pick a lane, the inability to wed these two stories together. It's very.
I like stitched together.
It's very disappointing. Well, it's called The Bride, Your Honor. Okay, let's have a little imagination. But I am willing to move on to my last point, Your Honor.
Please do.
All right. So actually, speaking of Clancy Brown, I watched an interview with Clancy Brown about this movie. He plays the monster, though. Spoilers. Man is the real monster. Oh, wow.
Damn it.
I know you hate that.
His name is Victor.
Yeah. And that is to say, Clancy Brown lamented how unfairly Jennifer Beals was treated by critics of this movie. And I'm sympathetic to that, as all of you can recall in our numerous discussions about showgirls, not even ones we have on the show. I just talk about it all the time. Actresses are sometimes given bad direction, and they end up getting more scorn than the directors that instructed them. So I can give her the benefit of the doubt, but it doesn't get her off the hook, because we have to acknowledge she had no way to play to her strengths after coming off of the thoroughly 80s, thoroughly modern Flashdance. She was not equipped as an actress or ready to be received by audiences in a period piece. And before you get too excited, Maynard, her assets on screen, that was a body double. And frankly, the way
What?
Rodman, yep, and the way Rodman laments this in his anemic, though at least it's their commentary, one could be forgiven to think he casted Beals just in hopes of seeing her naked. So, how is that for a feminist interpretation for you?
I've been using a body double for years.
Speaking of all too modern actors, let us also address the decidedly not wearing a codpiece acting of Sting. You just can't lose Sting in this role. He gives Beals nothing to work with either. She's acting up against two corpses in this movie.
And you'll rest there?
And yes, I will rest there, Your Honor, on the bad acting.
Please address this bad acting point, or emphasize it if you'd like.
Well,
Mr. Potter.
As I've stressed throughout, I've never claimed this is a great movie, and obviously the burden is on being proved to be awful. I do consider the Sting Jennifer Beals half to be the far weaker part of the film, and I think it's their casting actually misshapes the project.
I agree. There's probably a good story in there. You just need a director, a writer, and the actors to do it. I mean, it's almost like it would be a whole different movie.
It's the film crew.
If you hit at the point where Sting reveals to the bride, to Eva, that he created her and that he stitched her hands on from a different corpse. Well, there's clearly been it's shortly after he's told her to put her clothes back on when she has all her clothes on already. And I think something about Jennifer Beals' status means that they weren't able to have a woman who would take her clothes off on camera, which it's a delicate area, but it means it weakens that attempted rape sequence, which is always a tricky thing to have on film, but it makes almost laughable that it doesn't really exist as a threat. And then earlier, we've seen her naked. Apparently, we've seen her without gloves on. I've studied her wrists, and in one scene in particular, there's not a stitch on her. So I don't see. It feels like they decided not to do prosthetics on her. Maybe they thought she'd peel off like Clancy did. So by casting Jennifer Beals, who's just come off quite a big, high-profile movie, I think they're less able to make her the bride, and she becomes more of a blank slate, and that's a cruel part to give to any woman. And I'd like to apologise for all the women I've projected my hopes and fears on over the years for doing exactly the same thing.
We don't have that kind of time.
I have a list, Your
But
Honor.
is there anything positive about any of the performances that you'd like to accentuate?
Yeah, I would like to say that the Ronaldo and Victor half of the film is full of both visual beauty, in that's the bit that gets out the studio and gets out into the south of France mainly in the summer and looks beautiful, and it's full of really, I think, superb star turns. I do think that David Rappaport is beautiful as Ronaldo. He's one of these people who was around fringe theatre in Britain through the 70s, the 80s, did a lot on children's television, did a lot in alternative comedy. But like most dwarf actors, he very rarely got to play a human being. And to see him playing a fully rounded, charismatic human being, I think is lovely. I think the supporting cast, almost all the supporting cast really, are people who'd been in British comedies and tend to have characterful and peculiar faces and idiosyncrasy. And I think they sparkle. I think Alexei Sayle is wonderful as the ringmaster. My particular favourite in the whole piece, it's a very small film, but it's Ken Campbell as the peddler, who looks like he's going to con Victor, and then there's the reveal that he's nearly conning Victor, but we're also tricked into how much change he's giving him. It's a tiny little scene, but he
knocks it out of the park.
He is one of the greats of British theatre, very rarely seen on film. You'll see him in Fawlty Towers, a small part in Fish Called Wanda, I think was bigger before it got trimmed down. And it's a beautiful piece of work, and it's kind of the optimistic heart of the film in the place of all the grimness that goes on. Just to see this little spark of humanity. But I'd also like to stress that the film generally looks gorgeous.
Yeah.
I think that, as I say, I think the money and the willing of the crew runs out. The opening sequence is spectacular. It was done by the guy Chris Whitling, who did the rocket video for Herbie Hancock with all the animated legs twitching around, robotic legs and arms, and that writes a kind of check that the rest of the film can't then deliver. That's the wrong phrase, but we're just thrown in with spectacle at a level that we won't see again. But just even the shots of the French countryside and the medieval towns, I think there is a rich, gorgeous film in that half.
Mr. Schlender, do you have a rebuttal to the Ronaldo specific piece of the acting or the cinematography?
Well, I can address both points, because in so much as there's a stronger half to this bad movie, it is the Ronaldo Victor half, but it's still not great. And that's because there's just not a lot of meat on the bone, you know? It's like Frankenstein becomes friends with a small guy, and it's like, okay, what are we doing with that? And ultimately not much, because it just boils down to Ronaldo saying, follow your dreams, but more importantly, listen to your heart. I mean, it is just so sophomoric and boring, and adds absolutely nothing interesting.
Well, some of us still have dreams, Mr. Schlender.
Hey, Ryan and I followed our dreams. We did the circus thing. It's not all it's cracked up to be. But my point is,
I was the evil ringleader.
You still are the evil ringleader, Maynard. Who are you kidding? So anyway, so let's move on to the cinematography, because that is a good point. And what we have here is this nice bucolic imagery. We have the big foreboding castle, but it's so outsized and so much better than what we're getting in this movie. It's like 10 gallons of beautiful in a 1 gallon, bucket. It just doesn't fit the setting. It doesn't work. And if you wanted to look at like individual screenshots of the movie, yeah, you could say, okay, that's an interesting shot. But you have to remember there's always something going on, right? So, yes, it's a beautiful shot of the castle interior, but Sting and Beals are in it. Oh, this is a beautiful side. This is a beautiful countryside. Oh, but we have evil circus folk that we're dealing with, because did anyone for a second think Ronaldo was going to live? Well, of course we knew he was going to die. I mean, everything in this movie is just, like I said, there's no ups or downs. It's a track. You see the end. They're just waving at you for 2 hours. It's interminable.
Mr. Potter, do you have any other exhibits you'd like to present?
Let's just think about the journey to getting intellect, the journey to getting heart, and perhaps sometimes it's hard to fuse those two together, but that's what we've got to strive for in life, and maybe that's the ultimate fusion of bride and monster. It certainly is in my marriage.
And on that, you'll rest?
I will rest eternally.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Don't do that quite yet. You still have a closing coming up. But until then, Mr. Schlender, you may present your closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. To wrap up, The Bride of Frankenstein is a cultural character bigger than any one movie, show, or book. The idea of making a movie about her, giving it some heft, it's a good idea. Maybe one day we'll get a film worthy of being in the lineage of 1935's masterpiece. This movie right here today just misses the mark. And it is really the ending that does it all in. As both Ian and I have both said, they're not able to wed the two, stitch them together. The supposed feminist movie focuses disproportionately on the male friendship of Ronaldo and Victor. And then at the very end, when the monster and bride are reunited, instead of deciding that they are each masters of their own fate, that they can make their own way in a world as a gentleman and in a world as a lady, they revert to their purpose. They become one. And why? Just so we can get a feel-good ending with a dead Ronaldo talking about following your dreams? This is just such a whiff of a movie on nearly every level. There is probably a not guilty movie in here somewhere, but that is not what we get. That is not what the director gave us, and he missed his stated intentions again, as he said on his anemic, but at least it's there, commentary. So, everyone, this is not a hidden gem. There's probably a reason the first time you're hearing about this movie is because of this podcast. It is not low-key better than the 1935s. This is just another barbarian at the gate seeking the court's rehabilitation. The critics were right in the 80s, and age has not been kind to this movie. It is guilty, and that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Mr. Potter, you may present your closing argument.
Again and again, in this case, we've heard about a failure to achieve a stated goal, about an intellectualization of the bride, about Frank Rodham's post facto rationalization of what went wrong, where he failed. I would say this is a film that transcends intellect. My God, huge swathes of it transcend intellect. This is a film about how if you love somebody, set them free. This is a film about spirits in the material world, about a woman, every little thing she does is magic. A man who's so lonely he can't stand losing her. It's about sexual obsession, but it's also a film which is made with love and a love of the Universal films. I think the not Dr. Pretorius is quite a sweet case in point. Not only is Quentin Crisp very much the spiritual heir to Ernest Thesiger, he's actually a distant cousin of Boris Karloff. These kind of grace notes are there. I think this is not the feminist reinterpretation of The Bride of Frankenstein. I think it's unfair to ask it to be, particularly given that Maggie Gyllenhaal is releasing a film called The Bride with an exclamation mark next year, which is touted as a feminist reinterpretation of Frankenstein. I think now in the 1930s. So the new woman may be getting closer and closer to the modern day. But it's a film about looking beyond the monstrous and finding humanity. Tony Friel, who is the actor who plays Rinaldo when he's doing stunt work, he was an actor too, but he was not as expensive as David Rappaport. His other roles in movies, he plays second jailer in some TV Shakespeare adaptation. Beyond that, he plays Whizbit, who is a terrible little conical alien wizard magic thing in a terrible children's TV series. He plays a Womble in Womble in 3.
More Wombles!
The Wobbles!
Yeah.
We can't escape them.
The live action crazy adaptation of the Wombles, which should be forgotten. And, of course, he plays an Ewok in the children's fantasy Return of the Jedi, was it called? It's something for little kids, anyway.
Certainly is.
But what I would say is it's very rare to see an actor, a dwarf, a midget. They are different categories. Person of restricted growth. It is very rare to see them play a human being in the films. And I think it's a testimony to David Rappaport, who was a fine actor and a fine human being, and whose brother was the distributor of The Evil Dead in the UK. That's not really of any interest to anyone apart from me, but it's out now. Irving, also a very fine gentleman. It's rare to see them play a fully rounded human being on screen, and I applaud this film, if nothing else, for projecting otherness as human and asking us to celebrate our otherness. And I say, find it within yourselves to forgive this film. It may have borrowed its heart from somewhere else, but it is in the right place. Thank you.
Thank you both.
With a U.
Members of the jury.
Wait, we have that too.
He got you. Right at the end. Members of the jury, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, Mr. Maynard Bangs, and Mr. Oh my, here's a man that's been mistreated in life, Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict. Right this way. You know, the thing about Sting movies is while you're watching him, he'll be watching you.
I love the bailiff.
Bailiff, don't stand so close to me.
You don't have to put on that red light, bailiff.
Actually, do that's the verdict.
Actually,
like.
do.
Who Ryan?
I'm
going to
Grumbly.
Okay, fine. I'm going to Grumbly then.
No, you could be very
Fine,
real.
do it. I don't care.
The
I
very
like
real
totally
Grumbly
don't care
Grumblerson.
anymore. Okay, guys. I don't know about you, but I've never heard of this film until the moment we watched it.
Ditto.
No,
And
I
I
haven't
say
either.
we because we all watched these movies together, despite being separated
In
by
one big
time
room
zones.
on a big beanbag.
We have our apple juice and we have our graham crackers, and we just sit down and I like the movie.
That's it.
I was amazed in the opening credits when I recognized the director's name. I'm like, the guy who did Quadrophenia is doing The Bride of Frankenstein? This is fucking weird. And immediately as the movie starts, I'm like, well, at least it looks great. And then for about 2 hours, it bummed me out. Like, it was very, very boring, kind of super predictable. The character of Ronaldo notwithstanding, which I think was a tremendous boon to the film. But the main thing that I noticed in watching it, I'm like, this is Poor Things, but it's half as good.
Yeah.
Well, Poor Things is going to get its
Rob,
day.
what are you thinking?
Well, first, Poor Things is going to get its day. All right.
Yeah, I know.
Just
I know you
need a
did.
chat.
I know. We've talked about it.
I'll put it in its place.
On our beanbag.
Schlenzo's right about it being like sophist and just overly pleasant, but it hit me in the right mood for that. And I thought that was actually a good compliment to the Bride stuff, which was very stuffy and all high class. So I did not have trouble shifting between the two storylines. I was happier when we were with Victor, but I didn't have a problem with us going back and forth very much. I really liked Ronaldo, and I thought that this was a great... I think it is unfortunate that it's named The Bride, and I agree that she is more the object they're fighting over. But it's such a good reimagining of Frankenstein, and I don't know how many films were imagining sort of a positive outlook for Frankenstein by 1985. But like the fact that he could just get away from the toxic influences, like we see a couple times in the Universal, right? That he's a different person, and this kind of explores that. And Ronaldo is sort of everything that Sting isn't. Yeah, so. The unfortunate thing is all the Bride Sting stuff is very dull. I think that is because Sting's not the performer to pull it off. I think Beals is fine. I think she's supposed to be kind of doe-eyed and clueless most of the time because she's
reanimated. I mean, what else are you going to do?
Mentally a
she's
child.
Dead.
Well, or she's at least mentally a child, as they say. Which is like, Sting, you were saying that. Why do you want to marry her? That you creep.
She reads and knows everything in all those books, and like
that's eventually. That's eventually. Right, and she's not as dull then. That's when she starts learning and stuff. But she, for the first 30 minutes, she can't do much of that.
Oh, sure.
Right. So it's a movie that is more front heavy. The beginning of this movie is a lot better than the ending. Big Ben, what'd you think?
Frankenstein.
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much took the words out of my mouth. I love the opening statement or
I was reading your notes.
Opening scene. Yeah, thank you for that. You stole it from our beanbag.
It was on the beanbag.
I love how like that vertical tower, like that cinematography, like kind of mimics the Bride of Frankenstein. Of course, they had the notes to steal from, but they nail it. That opening scene it looks fantastic. And yeah, the Ronaldo Victor stuff. Great. I want to see more of those too. I want to see those as guys in a TV series where they're roaming the countryside and getting in mischief and stuff.
All the mysteries.
Yeah. And yeah, the Sting Beal stuff. It's not. It doesn't answer the questions I wish it did. Like she's like created for the monster, and then like gets away from the monster, and yet she ends up with the monster again, and like the electricity combines or connects them in some way. I wish it answered those questions, but the aim of this courtroom is you don't have to get it to good, you just have to get it to not bad. So there is a spirit there that's in that Ronaldo Victor stuff that is very entertaining, and the Beals Sting stuff not great but doesn't kill it. So I think I'm willing to lock in not guilty.
Rob?
Oh, man. Ben, I don't know if I can vote any Frankenstein movie guilty. Although one where he doesn't fight Baragon is probably as close as we're going to get. Man. Should I not make it interesting? I really do think it is uplifting. I think if a movie's supposed to kind of, but there's the point of it to be uplifting. I don't see it as any of the feminist stuff. I don't think they executed that very well. But as far as like you can be masters of your own destiny, I did like that kind of stuff. I'm gonna lock in not guilty. Sorry, Ryan. I'm gonna take it out of you, and we're gonna
you're still gonna let you. Where I go with this one.
Sure.
So I do not like this movie, but the minute Ian started talking about it, I'm like, well, actually, maybe I'm kind of wrong. I'm not surprised that Ian is as articulate as he is. I've been listening to Rifftrax for more than a decade now, so that does not surprise me whatsoever. But the depth of his knowledge about this stuff eclipses anything I could ever hope to know about it. So I'm going to have to, I don't like it, but he won me over. So not guilty. It's a unanimous verdict, guys. Not guilty.
It was the beanbag. It was the vibes on the beanbag.
So let's go tell that very handsome judge.
He is handsome.
It's been disputed. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of The People versus the Bride, we find the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
Just follow your heart.
I don't know. I'm so used to booing. I boo every time. I agreed with this one, but it feels wrong to not boo.
You're so negative. Listen to Ronaldo. That's what you need. You need to tour my verdict's for Maynard. He needs to tour the countryside with Ronaldo and learn to follow his heart for a bit. Court is adjourned.
Hey, this is the very real Mumbly Mumblerson, reman back from the dead. They call me Mumblestein. How's it going? Let's talk to some people about that verdict that was in there. It was wilding out there. Ian Potter, why don't you tell us what you thought about that jury's verdict?
Well, I was quite taken aback by how open-minded and warm those people were underneath their sickening carapaces of cynicism. When I went in, I thought, oh, tad funky. But actually, they turned out to be
was the other guy,
really
actually.
charming people.
No, I have to keep that.
That's what that was there in Ghostbusters?
No, I'm the very real Mumbly Mumblerson. Keep going, Ian.
I heard some mention of Ghostbusters. I'm sorry, my mind wandered to
yes, have some. Now, Dylan J. Schlender, what did you think about that jury's verdict? Did you agree with them? They're some nice guys.
I have stood here before inside the pouring rain, with the world turning circles, running round my brain. I guess I'm always hoping that you'll end this reign, but it's my destiny to be the king of pain.
Because I can't stand losing you.
Yeah.
And with that, let's go back to post-trial analysis. That's all the time we have from the courthouse today.
I love the way you sing like out of tune that way. That was so good.
Yeah, that, and it took a lot of talent to do that on purpose, Ben. Thank you. Fun trial. It's hard for me to vote down any Frankenstein, but I thought this was an interesting one. And it's not a great one. You know, we're not. It's definitely not competing with the 35. But I do think
this movie is never going to have Frankenstein's granddaughter meet Jesse James. Abbott and Costello are not going to turn up in this. This is not top rank Frankenstein.
You know, Billy the Kid met Dracula once.
Yeah, they're
very popular among British people.
Yeah, but it is actually trying to do something with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which God help us, Kenneth Branagh's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, in the spirit of Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, is not Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and this at least touches on some of what's going on in the novel. And I mean, Charles Frankenstein is weird, but I guess they were very keen to have Victor be Victor. But yeah, I'm delighted. I'm delighted that you found it within yourselves to see beyond. I mean, Frank Rodham now. I mean, he's most famous now for being the guy who invented MasterChef. That's what he's taken around the world. So he started off making documentaries for the BBC, things like The Family, which was one of the first kind of docu-soaps.
The cooking stuff, MasterChef.
MasterChef is a internationally franchised cooking competition.
We have Iron Chef
many
over
episodes
here.
of it are quite like The Bride. It always annoys me as a vegetarian. I sit there watching just things get diced up for my pleasure. But again, I'm talking about my marriage again. Sorry,
Those
God.
vegetables don't cut themselves up. You and Ben, you guys get hang out a lot. Now, what do you do when you're not putting movies on and defending movies? What keeps you busy?
Well, I write a bit. A lot of what I write at the moment seems to be about Doctor Who. I write audio dramas for Big Finish, officially licensed Doctor Who audio drama. I've written a few factual books about Doctor Who, some of them going into absolute terrifying minutiae. I'm right in the middle of one of those now, which is involving me in reading all sorts of weird stuff, which is always a delight to take a children's program and attempt to spoil it.
Do they have a lot of like novels, like spin-off novels, like how Star Wars does?
Yeah, there have been a lot. I've done some of the short stories in that and some spin-off of spin-offs, but I've never done the novels. The novels always struck me as as alien to what Doctor Who was, which is essentially studio drama that nips out and goes on film every now and again, and then abuses the videotape process to make weird things happen. It's kind of like Dark Shadows with slightly less rehearsal on occasion, and that's what I love, because it used to expose the way television was made in some ways, and I loved it because I was a kid and I love exciting stuff, and I still love it. The other thing I do a lot of is I slag off old movies with Matthew J. Elliott for Rifftrax.
Hey, I know that guy.
We've got another one of those coming out. I think after the next Rifftrax live show, I think our next riff will be released, I suppose is the technical term, in that it's currently in captivity and screaming to be let out. So yeah, that keeps me fairly busy.
Mm-hmm. And our love out to Matthew J. Elliott, of course.
Yes, indeed.
You better be listening. We're going to test him. He's going to have to say the password after here.
No,
we're
going to
sour
say,
cream.
Matthew, how many U's in this episode?
If you said you, referring to me. Yeah, Rifftrax is great. You guys did Warning from Space. That's one of my favorites of any Rifftrax.
That seems such a long time ago. And it's so scary. You're something that's already been dubbed, and then you think there might be bits missing of it, and then you come and talk over the top of it. I fear I may have used the word palimpsest at some point in one of those riff tracks, because it's a text with so many levels of meaning, darling, at the end of it all.
I'm very fond of The Veil.
It came in. I was quite ill during COVID era, and sadly Matthew's now got long COVID, which he's working his way through, and I know he's going to keep getting better and better. And doing serial things was really great for us in that period, in that we could just do half-hour chunks, 25-minute chunks of stuff at a time. Mm-hmm. So The Veil is just in a beautiful sweet spot of nearly good, but always reassuringly terrible in the end, which is my absolute perfect spot for a riff. Occasionally there's been films where I've gone, oh, I love this. I think they're really trying. And that makes it quite hard to be cruel. But will we get there?
I can't make myself hate Manos, no matter what. It's unendingly charming to me is Manos, no matter how slow.
I see the end. I see it over there.
Well, that's
awesome.
a langer, isn't it?
No, well, I was wondering if you were gonna, if that was everything you were talking about, because you also have videos of hedgehogs, and those are important. And
yes,
I don't know if you plug your hedgehog videos at all.
They're very much a private vice. They're Facebook only, really.
Oh.
Just because I went to Blue Sky from Twitter when it started becoming pure evil incarnate, and Blue Sky was really bad at uploading videos. So my hedgehogs have become a little bit of a secret pleasure. But
okay, I won't.
They are beautiful.
I can cut all reference to hedgehogs in here if you want.
No. They are beautiful creatures. We have them in our back garden, and they're most entertaining when they're territorial, in that they run at each other and headbutt, and then roll their opponent away. But they're generally gorgeous. But when they hit psychosis, they're kind of quite comical.
Because we don't have them just roaming around.
No, you have weird hedgehogs that are pale. Ours are proper brown throughout, and you have these kind of toy hedgehogs with kind of teacup hedgehogs, I would say.
I want to find these
blue
wild
and stuff.
What wild blue hedgehogs? They're spinning around,
Really fast.
stealing people's rings.
Well, this has taken a peculiar turn. I I worry.
That's the way we operate here.
Yeah.
And speaking of peculiar turns, why don't you hit us with a recommendation? We always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies that you think people should see. So what is a movie you think people should see?
I mean, this was tricky because there's loads of things I love, and I thought, well, you're going to come down on The Bride very, very strongly against, and I thought, well, I need to give you another film, which is very languid, big landscapes, not very much happening, but which I think has a beautiful core to it. And that's why I'm on the crowd-pleasing, big action epic Urga, which you've never heard of. Urga is a film from 1991. It's a Russian-French co-production. It's by Russian director Nikita Mikhailov. In North America,
Franco Russo.
In North America, it's released as Close to Eden, which is a terrible title. And basically, it's about a family of Mongolian shepherds in Inner Mongolia, and a Russian truck driver. His truck comes off the road, and they end up kind of buddying up. And it's just a film really about tradition, nature, and the slow evolution of tradition. But the thing that really makes it is these huge landscapes, and the sound design. You hear the minutiae of nature, and there's a beautiful soundtrack by the guy who did Tarkovsky's films, Eduard Artemiev, and he works with Steve Hillage, who did a lot of kind of 70s trippy, noodly kind of ambient work, and then there's Mongolian throat singing in it, and the whole thing.
Oh, that stuff is good. I like that.
The whole thing is just kind of it's very slow moving, but it's both epic and intimate, and has a couple of set piece moments which are beautiful. One of which, annoyingly, used to be on the VHS box in the UK, and you just go, "God damn it! They worked to make this film to avoid you seeing that bit, and it's the only bit they want to sell you." But again, if you haven't wanted to end your lives watching The Bride, this is a far more competently made film than The Bride, but it has some of that.
Do you know what kind of crap we have to watch on this show?
But this is a beautiful film. Obviously, it's all subtitled, which may be alarming. I can't
Even the throat singing?
The throat singing, it generally just goes.
Wow. That would be a funny subtitle. It's just wow.
Continuous throat singing.
There's a lot of O's and U's in there, I tell you. That's the way it goes.
Excellent.
So it may not be the kind of dreadful pabulum you guys normally go for, but that's my recommendation.
I like it. Now let's see what kind of dreadful pablium that Schlenzo's got for us. Schlenzo?
It's actually kind of funny. My movie's also subtitled because, as you know, I like to keep up with Spanish horror movies that feature a lot of Catholic moralizing and preferably take place in the 80s, juxtaposed to real events I know nothing about and struggle to see how they pertain to the plot. And in that spirit, I'm recommending Tin and Tina from 2023. And honestly, I'm a little surprised at how poorly received this movie was, as I think a lot of it hits the notes it's aiming for, and it works well for a philosophical horror movie where religion plays an outside role. The brass tacks are an infertile couple adopts maladjusted 7-year-old albino twins that are either malicious or almost fey-like in their misunderstanding of how the real world works, and this terrorizes their adoptive mother. The boy twin is so redolent of Macaulay Culkin, you immediately want to make allusions back to the best exploitation film of all time, The Good Son, and the girl twin is just too good an actor. Her charismatic emotional intelligence is too much for how her character is written, and so it is very easy to think the twins are just evil with her calling the shots, even though the movie does want you to struggle more with that question. However, if the worst thing you could say is that the kid actors are too good for the material that they are working with, all I can do is hope that rings as an endorsement, not a demerit.
If I can flag up one other companion piece to that, if people are into a lot of old blather about Frankenstein and Spanish horror films with kids in that speak to the Spanish Civil War period, Spirit of the Beehive, 1973, is a film haunted by both Franco's Spain and Boris Karloff's Frankenstein's Monster. It's not got that 80s schlock horror thing. It's a bit more The Bride in its mimsiness. But if we want an intersection for this episode, there's your film.
I know. I like.
Yeah,
I'll look
I
up
like
that
it.
one too. It was Secret of the Beehives.
It's Spirit of the
Spirit
Beehive.
of the Beehives.
Yeah, there's no secret. The secret's
Well,
the
the
spirit.
secret's to remember the title. Big Ben, what have you got for us?
The on
Wait,
topic.
Schlender, were you done, or did you have a final quip to send us out on?
You know me so well. So my last bit was the movie leaves you asking some questions. So if it sticks with you, that's a good thing. But given the low scores and the subtitles, I could understand how people could get scared away. But check it out, and if you really hate it, come on the show, and I'll give it a proper defense.
You're right. That wasn't worth going back for. Big Ben, what have you got?
The on-topic recommendation would be The Bride of Frankenstein, but Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
Already recommended it.
Very low budget.
You gotta know when to Frankie him.
Whatever. Watch any movie. Any movie's fine. But no, Ryan already recommended it, so I'm going to go with The Son of Frankenstein, which follows that, and it keeps the good times rolling. Well, I kind of miss the scenes of the monster grappling with his humanity from the previous two. Son of Frankenstein does a decent job of keeping the world going without rehashing the exact plot points of its predecessors, as most sequels do. Son of Frankenstein features the son of the famous doctor trying to clear his father's good name by healing the monster as it carries out murders on behalf of Igor, who isn't quite like the Igor you picture in your heads. It's Bela Lugosi who plays him, and he does such a terrific performance as this guy, a deformed blacksmith who's misshapen due to a botched hanging years earlier, and he uses this bond with the creature to enact his revenge. The inspector is also fantastic as well, who, alas, is somewhat ruined for me thanks to Young Frankenstein's lampooning of him. I maintain that Young Frankenstein does have a great deal of respect for its source material, but the fact remains that once you've seen that, it's really hard to watch the original portrayal without some of those jokes running through your head. But at any rate, the first three Frankenstein movies are fantastic and worth watching as a trilogy.
Here. And it's the introduction of Igor as well.
That movie. Oh my god.
Yeah.
They stay fine, then he's going to meet the Wolfman. Anything can happen
Ian.
when they meet.
You might even clap for him.
Ian, did you say something as well?
All I was going to say is it's a great. I mean, it's lower budget than the James Wales, but it rollicks along, and Rathbone's great in the lead, and it's the introduction of Igor because previously we had Fritz and Carl as the kind of in some way disabled assistant of Frankenstein, and the Igor legend starts here in Son of Frankenstein.
Yeah, see,
Igor.
It's
everyone rollicker.
Everyone thinks that Dwight
Master,
Fry.
they think that's him. Yeah,
they think Dwight Fry is Igor from the first one.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
now
it's weird. He's both Fritz and Carl who have different.
Mm-hmm.
I think Fritz has got a hunchback, and maybe Carl has got his leg in a caliper. But basically, this one guy wandering around with disabilities to work for mad scientists in that era.
And he's Renfield.
Yeah.
So now my recommendation this week is a long-awaited one, roughly 50 years in the making to be exacting. It's 2023's The Primevals, directed by stop-motion artist David Allen and completed posthumously via crowdfunding. David Allen's work has been featured in numerous films throughout the 70s and 80s, including The Howling, Twilight Zone the movie, and of course, Laser Blast. Frankly, you'd have a hard time avoiding his work. I'm a big fan of Q and When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth. Well, The Primevals follows in this proud tradition. It's Burroughs-esque adventure fare following a group of scientists as they trek into the Himalayas in search of the enigmatic Yeti, only to discover a primordial world, which has been lost to time, you see.
Slow down, Maynard.
Some of the stop motion was completed by Allen in the 70s, and a lot of live action was filmed in 1994 during one of this project's many near revivals. And then the modern day team had to complete some of the unfinished stop motion and staple together what they could on the meager $40,000 raised by the campaign, but they did it. Fans of 90s low-budget adventure films such as 1992's The Lost World will feel at home with this one. Don't expect something insanely technical like Phil Tippett's Mad God. Just be thankful that there are still artists that exist today that can finish a project like this and not allow all that hard work to go to waste. I know that Ryan is going to finish my 900-page novel after I die. So far, I only got 11 pages, but you can do this, man. And with that, Ryan, why don't you send us on home with your recommendation?
My recommendation this week is another recent release, albeit on a smaller scale. Ron Howard's documentary, Jim Henson, Idea Man. Were you thinking that it's been a long time since I recommended a film that made me cry? Well, it did.
Week.
Jim Henson had an effect on my childhood that cannot be overstated. Essentially, the third influence after my birth parents. As a documentary, it's pretty standard. Lots of talking heads, vaults of behind-the-scenes magic-making footage, and even a dash of Henson's foray into digital puppetry that would reach its apex with Waldo C. Graphic in Muppet Vision 4D, an attraction I shall prepare to violently keep in Disney's Hollywood Studios. It was completed... Well, actually, I should say it this way. It completed the picture of just who this man was, without sacrificing some necessary mystique. Then, Big Bird shows up at his cathedral funeral, and I was absolutely devastated, sobbing uncontrollably. Jim Henson Idea Man is streaming exclusively on Disney+. When you're done rewatching X-Men 97 or complaining about The Acolyte, maybe give it a spin.
I could do both.
I'll be rewatching it at least 3 more times.
Idea Man or The Acolyte?
X-Men 97.
Oh! I should watch the Muppet one. That would be kind of nice. I heard that they
love Ron Howard. You love Jim Henson. It just makes sense.
I heard they finally included the famous walk-ins nude scene.
What?
He's a Muppet. Don't worry about it. He's an old Muppet from the 50s. But with that, we're all out of the show. But we want to thank this weird Muppet from the 50s, Ian Potter. Thank you for joining us. That was very Muppety.
Just imagine the arms were waggling on their wires there.
I could see it.
I saw the whole thing. You did a great job, and we can't wait to have you back.
Well, I'm astounded. Thank you for welcoming me into your insane world of jurisprudence.
The pillory's ready, though, for the next one.
And bring some hedgehogs. and we hope everyone else will join us as well.
Kidneys.
As the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Sting!
It's Sting!
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.